Hello, and welcome to The History Book. I'm your host, Jacob Thomas, and today we are taking an in-depth look into a famous song and one of the worst shipping disasters in United States history. So pull up a chair and let's get into the history of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Good Wednesday afternoon to all you out there. Today, like I said in the introduction, we're going to be talking about the wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. To begin the show, I'll give you a brief introduction of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald and her very odd and troublesome launching, and really a history of her career up into the wreck. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a Great Lakes shipping vessel primarily used to move taconite iron ore from mines in Minnesota to ports across the Great Lakes, such as areas like Detroit and Cleveland. At the time of its operating, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was the largest ship on the Great Lakes. To sort of give a bit of a caveat before we move further on to the episode, a few times you may hear me call the ship by her nickname, and you will hear me refer to the boat or ship as she or her. This is common naval talk, and a lot of the sources will do this, and I like to keep with the sources. So let's get back into this. As I was saying, the ship was named after the president of the owner of the ship, the Northwest Mutual Life Insurance, the company that owned the ship, is what I'm trying to say there. The ship had many nicknames assigned to it: Fitz, Big Fitz. The famous one is the Pride of the American Side, and after its sinking and wreck, it was known as the Titanic of the Great Lakes. Now, Fitz was launched on June 7th, 1958, and was plagued by misfortunes upon its christening and maiden voyage. As I said earlier on, Edmund Fitzgerald's wife, as I said, he was the president of the Northwest Mutual Life Insurance. His wife was tasked with christening the ship, which is breaking a champagne bottle over the bow. Now, as she was trying to do this, she failed 3 times to get the bottle to break. The launch was delayed when the workers couldn't get the rope free from the dock so the ship could launch. When the ship did launch, it launched at a sideways angle, and after really correcting itself to get off to its maiden voyage, it sent a giant wave over the spectators at the launch, because this was very much a spectacular launch. The launch quickly led to a very serious incident and a disaster when a man who was watching the launch had a heart attack while watching and died shortly after the launch. The ship would also operate as a passenger carrier, but it did not have passengers on the night she sank. Afterwards, the ship performed greatly and became really a beacon to the American shipping across the Great Lakes. However, on November 10th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald would meet her fate. Right now, I know this wasn't really a long segment, but this episode, I'm not planning on it being way too long. This is really, if you're curious about more information on it, I really recommend going and reading about the wreck and the ship, and eventually the song written by Gordon Lightfoot. But right now, as I was saying, we are going to take a short break so we can hear how you can stay connected with the History Book on social media and where you can hear the show across multiple platforms. Hello everyone, this is Jacob, the host of the History Book, here to remind you that you can find the History Book on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as on our website, www.thehistorybook20.wixsite.com/thehistorybook. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Hello, and welcome back to the episode. As I was saying, the Edmund Fitzgerald really became the pride of the American side up until that fateful night in November when the winds of November came early, as the song says. At 2:15 p.m. on November 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald launched from a bay in Minnesota, heading for a mine near Detroit. The forecast for that night originally called for winter storms near the southern ports of the Great Lakes, specifically on Lake Superior where the Fitzgerald was headed. By 4:15 p.m., the forecast changed and the gale warnings were issued across the lakes with hurricane-force winds and a lot of snow. Fitzgerald met up with the SS Arthur M. Anderson in order to make this trip across the lake together, and the Anderson would eventually split off and go to its own separate destination. By 3:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald and Anderson were in the depth of the storm and experiencing hurricane-force winds with 35-foot waves. The Fitzgerald was being captained by Ernest M. McSorley, who was 63 at the time and on the verge of retirement. The Fitzgerald had outsped the Anderson by 16 miles at full speed, and water was starting to come onto the deck of the ship. Captain McSorley radioed in to the Anderson and explained that he had lost one of his radars, and the Anderson quickly responded back, said, "Please slow down to half speed and try to make it to Whitefish Bay. We're going to try and track you with our radar and give you some sort of direction where you're going," because at this point visibility is at a minimum with all the snow and rain and freezing cold weather they are experiencing. Now, Captain McSorley had radio in, as I said, had radio into the Anderson, and what he says is this: "I have a bad list. I have lost both radars and I am taking on heavy seas over the deck in one of the worst seas I have ever been in." As I said, the Fitzgerald slowed down so the Anderson could track her on her radar to about half speed, and they were directed to Whitefish Bay. Around 7:15, the Anderson radioed again to the Fitzgerald and to check in on her. Captain McSorley, answered back with, "We are holding our own." Shortly after that communication, the ship met its demise. The sinking occurred around 16 miles from Whitefish Bay, a point it could have reached if it hadn't slowed down to half speed in such a terrible storm. None of the crew of 29 was found, and they were all presumed dead. They ranged from the youngest at age 20 to 63, and that was Captain McSorley, who, as I said, was nearing retirement at the time of the sinking. The area she had went down claimed around 240 ships from 1816 when this data was being kept to 1975 when the Fitzgerald sank. As a sort of a separate incident, there's also something that was called the Great Lake Storm of 1913, which at one point in a night claimed 19 ships and over 250 lives. This area was not a safe place to be traveling, especially in winter storms. The wreckage was eventually found on November 14th, 1975, and now this next part of the episode will really kind of discuss what happens in the aftermath of the wreck, how the Great Lakes shipping sort of changes, what the results are to the mutual life insurance, and of course the song made famous by Gordon Lightfoot. Welcome back after that short break. As I was saying, this next part of the episode is really going to be discussing what happens to the Edmund Fitzgerald afterwards, as well as sort of changes that are made in Great Lakes shipping because of it, and of course the song by Gordon Lightfoot, because how could we possibly skip that if we're talking about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Now, this wreck resulted in a $24 million loss, which is still the greatest single financial loss on Great Lakes shipping history. The wreckage is in Canadian waters where it was found, but since the ship is owned by the United States, the wreckage is considered American property. The Northwest Mutual Life Insurance was sued by two different widows of crew members aboard, but the company went to courts shortly after these lawsuits and settled basically to say we can't be sued for any more than this amount, to really put a stop to how much they were being brought into courts because of this. The wreck and sinking was commemorated by ringing of bells and the reading of the 29 names of the men who died. because the wreck has been greatly disputed, cause of the wreck has been greatly disputed, with one of the major theories being that of the three sisters, or three rogue waves, which could easily sink a ship if it had already had damage, which many theorize that the Edmund Fitzgerald did. However, ships built like the Edmund Fitzgerald were meant to last over half a century, so the Edmund Fitzgerald really should have had more time to her life. Most historians agree that severe weather was a major contributing factor, but was not the only cause of the wreck. Because of the wreck, the Great Lakes Shipping issued new shipping laws. Ships now had a mandatory survival suits on board, mandatory depth finders, now mandatory positioning systems, as well as increased freeboard, or the distance from the waterline to the deck, and more frequent inspections. As we sort of talked about, it was commemorated with the ringing of bells. Now, the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald is actually pulled out of the wreckage, which was a very frequent diving spot for a long time. It is now illegal to dive into the wreckage. However, like I said, the bell is pulled out of the wreckage and is put in a church, and really kind of becomes a tourist attraction, and the Great Lakes shipping industry and widows and family members of the crew really take offense to this and say this really shouldn't be made into a tourist attraction, and the bell is eventually moved into a museum on Whitefish Bay. Now, as I had stated earlier, we have to talk about the Gordon Lightfoot song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which he wrote about a year after the wreck occurred. Lightfoot stayed very close to actual facts of the wreck, and he really strained with writer's block due to the fact that he didn't want to divert from actual facts. Such as at one point in the song, he says they were leaving fully loaded for Cleveland, because apparently it turns out that Detroit does not have a lot of rhymes, but Cleveland does. Just a sort of odd change. Gordon Lightfoot also makes a larger-than-life character out of the ship's cook. Really, there's no telling what was said or done while the Edmund Fitzgerald was in the midst of this storm. It's really a lot of creative liberty, good creative liberty, but there's no telling what was actually said when the ship sank, because there were no survivors, other than what was radioed back and forth between Anderson, the SS Anderson, the Fitzgerald, and everyone else listening. Now, as I said, the Edmund Fitzgerald is commemorated at Whitefish Bay. Right now, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll conclude the show, and I will let you guys know what the next topic is going to be and when it will be airing. To cap off this week's episode of the History Book, I want to announce that the next topic will be airing on August 5th. Like I said, usually they get posted around 1 o'clock, and they usually go live right about then. The next episode will be covering a really interesting topic that one of the friends of the show, Damien, sort of brought back into my attention. I'd known a little bit about it before, but it's an interesting topic that I think deserves some attention, and that is the praying Indian villages that were created by white settlers as they arrived in the New World into the colonies. I want to thank you all for listening, and as always, I'm Jacob, and this has been The History Book.